Chers confrères, veuillez mettre vos microphones en mute pour qu'on n'ait pas d'interférence. Merci.
Now it's done. Sorry, I'm not able to actually upload it.
Doctor, you open the PPT and then share, doctor.
It's actually open and just 1 minute. Let me. Are you able to see it now?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
So I'll talk about recent advances in liver transplant. My name is Dr. Shailendra Lalwani. I am a liver transplant surgeon and I am the head of the department in Manipal Hospital, Delhi, where we do liver transplant and all the hepatobiliary pancreatic surgeries. We do all laparoscopic and robotic liver resection, pancreatic surgeries, and all gastrointestinal surgeries also.
Il va parler aujourd'hui des avancées dans la transplantation du foie. Il est chef de département du service de pathologie et il va parler de la transplantation aujourd'hui. Yes, please.
Yeah. So I'll give you the brief history of liver transplant, how liver transplant was started. So first liver transplant was attempted by Sir Thomas Sturgill in USA in 1963. Although initially this was the first transplant. At that time there was not good immunosuppression was available, so this patient had immediate rejection. That patient died. So after that they worked on that for almost 4 years. So first successful liver transplant in USA was done by Sir Thomas Sturgill in 1967 only. But it was in 1980 when the cyclosporin was discovered. This is an immunosuppressive agent. After that, the liver transplant became the clinical reality actually. So in 1980, again, along with cyclosporin, they developed the UW solution, which is being used for the graft perfusion and preservation. So after discovery of the cyclosporin and UW solution only, the liver transplant became the clinical reality. So from 1963 to 1980, success rate was not that great. And in the same year, if you see in 1963, in UK, Sir Roy Khan attempted this first liver transplant. So it was started simultaneously in USA and UK. But in 1983, it became the definitive therapy for end-stage liver disease. So how we started liver transplant in India, I'll give you the short, brief history, how the liver transplant was developed in India. So at that time, if you see in 1980s, it was like India was actually struggling with a lot of infectious disease. So developing liver transplant in this country was very difficult. At the same time, if you see in US and UK, they started doing liver transplant. So first discussion of liver transplant was started in 1988 in India. There was a program which was called as the World This Week. The first discussion of liver transplant was started in that TV program in 1988. So if you see the situation in 1988, this was a lady who was suffering from chronic liver disease, and she was being treated in AIMS, All India Institute of Medical Sciences. And was the biggest institute at that time because no private services were available at that time. So this lady was suffering from cirrhosis, and if you see, she died within 6 months of diagnosis because liver transplant as a treatment was not available at that time in India.
Okay,
at the same
doctor,
time,
if
yeah.
you don't mind, after one slide, I can translate for them.
Sure. So
Donc,
I'll start.
Il disait que il donnait l'historique de la transplantation du foie. Ça a commencé en 1963. Mais il y avait beaucoup de réjections parce qu'ils n'avaient pas encore trouvé d'immunothérapie. La première fois qu'il y a eu la transplantation du foie, c'était en 1967, mais la transplantation a pris corps et a commencé à donner des effets généralement aux alentours de l'année 1980. C'est aux alentours des années 1980 quand ils ont trouvé la cyclosporine, la molécule qui aide pour l'immunosuppression, qu'il y a eu beaucoup de succès. En Inde, c'était difficile parce qu'il y avait beaucoup d'infections, des maladies infectieuses, et c'était difficile de faire la transplantation hépatique. En 1988, il y a eu un programme qu'on appelait la semaine de la transplantation, où ils ont commencé à tenter à faire la transplantation du foie. Thank you. And go ahead.
So at the same time in 1988, if you see, this was a lady who was suffering from cirrhosis in UK, and she underwent liver transplant and she was living normal life at that time. As compared to India, where patients were suffering and they were dying.
Okay. À ce moment-là, il y a une dame en Inde qui avait une cirrhose du foie et qui a reçu une transplantation et qui a survécu.
So if you see, situation in 1988 was that in India actually we were facing almost 30,000 deaths per year because of liver failure. At the same time, in Western countries, they did almost 4,500 liver transplants till then, and almost 120 centers were working on liver transplants, and the success rate was almost 80%, and 5-year survival was 70%.
Donc, il y avait au moins 3,000 décès pour insuffisance hépatique en Inde en 1988, pendant que dans les autres pays, il y avait 80% de succès pour la transplantation de foie et 70% des gens après 5 ans survivaient. Yes.
So in 1990, Health Committee, this committee was formulated by Health Ministry. But at that time, if you see, there were a lot of problems because there was no law on brain death in India at that time. Expertise was not available for liver transplant. There were actually widespread organ trading was happening in the kidneys. And the cost of liver transplant was at that time very high.
En 1990, il y avait un comité sur la transplantation du foie, mais malheureusement, ils avaient beaucoup de problèmes. Il n'y avait pas de loi quand une personne décède pour faire la transplantation du foie. Il y avait beaucoup de commerce illicite pour les reins et il n'y avait pas de gens qui étaient entraînés pour ça, pour faire la transplantation du foie et les prix étaient élevés. Yes.
So in 1990, 4 conferences were actually organized in different metro cities of India, like Mumbai, Madras, Calcutta, and Delhi. So this was the first step because they wanted to educate the patients and public first about liver transplant. So with the aim of that only, they conducted 4 different conferences in 4 metro cities.
Donc, en 1990, ils ont fait 4 conférences à Bombay, Madras, Calcutta et Delhi pour d'abord éduquer la population sur la transplantation des reins. Yes.
So still there were problems because media was not very positive for liver transplant because at that time the cost of liver transplant was almost $30,000 US. At that time, the means I'll say equipments and instruments were not that great, so there was a lot of blood loss during the transplant. So we were required almost 30 to 40 units during that transplant at that time only. It was not a very profitable, I'll say, treatment. So private hospitals were also not very keen to start this type of liver transplant program. And at the same time, as I told you that at that time, India was actually struggling with a lot of infectious disease like malaria and tuberculosis. So it was very difficult to divert the funds towards the liver transplant. So it was like putting a CT scan when you are struggling for malarial infections.
Donc, il y avait beaucoup de problèmes au début pour la transplantation du foie. Les médias ne suivaient pas, il n'y avait pas beaucoup de publicité sur ça. Et le prix de la transplantation du foie était autour de $30,000. Et comme la technique ne suivait pas, ils utilisaient beaucoup de sang pour faire la transplantation, jusqu'à 40 unités de sang. Alors, les gens ne se focalisaient pas beaucoup sur la transplantation de foie parce qu'ils avaient beaucoup de problèmes avec la malaria. Donc, ils ne voulaient pas mettre les fonds pour la transplantation de foie alors qu'ils ont des problèmes de la malaria. Yes?
So, but at that same time, if you see, there were a lot of benefits with starting the program like liver transplant because you can save young and productive lives. If you see, the cost in US at that time was almost $120,000, and at the same time in India it was comparatively 1/4, like $30,000 US. It would have been the nation's pride, and because at that time, if you see, we were dependent on the foreign countries for liver transplant. So that dependence would have been ended if we would have started the liver transplant program at that time.
Il y avait beaucoup de bénéfices pour la transplantation hépatique parce que les jeunes chez qui on a fait la transplantation, ils vivaient une vie productive et avaient des enfants. Et l'avantage aussi, c'était le prix. Aux États-Unis, c'était à $120,000, mais en Inde, c'était seulement à 30,000. Et comme ils venaient d'acquérir leur indépendance, c'était une fierté nationale que de faire des transplantations hépatiques. Yes?
So the second step was change in the law. So in 1991, Singhvi Committee was formulated, which conceptualized the definition of brain death, their requirements and implication, and it was actually they wanted to formulate this brain dead law to safeguard against misuses because a lot of organ trading was happening in kidney transplant. So finally in 1992, this bill was passed by the Indian Parliament, and in 1994 it came out as a law.
Ils ont commencé par changer la loi sur la mort cérébrale parce que dans ce temps-là, il y a eu beaucoup de trafic illicite du rein. Alors, ils ont donné le concept et la définition de la mort cérébrale et ses implications. Et ils ont passé ça sous forme de loi. Et en 1994, le bill est passé en forme de loi pour la transplantation des organes.
So in 1995, Transplantation of Human Organ Act was actually became the law, in which they defined the organ retrieval criteria, they defined the brain death. Authorization committee was formed in different institutes, which will verify the documents and they verify the emotional attachment. So the trade of organs was declared illegal and it was considered as non-cognizable offense.
Donc, en 1995, l'acte clairement stipule que le trafic illégal des organes est prohibé et c'était prohibé. Et les critères étaient clairement établis sur la mort cérébrale et quand est-ce qu'on peut prendre les organes du décédé pour faire la transplantation. C'était clairement clarifié.
So third step was to do the initial procedures, because at that time, if you see, it was the new procedure, expertise was not that great. So initially, the mortality was also very high. So initially, people were not very keen to undergo this liver transplant. So the first liver transplant was done in 1995 only, but that was the deceased donor liver transplant. And first living donor liver transplant was started in 1996 only.
OK. La première étape, c'était de faire la première procédure parce que les gens avaient peur de la transplantation hépatique parce que la mortalité était élevée. Et alors, en 1996, la première transplantation rénale hépatique a été faite, mais le résultat initial avec beaucoup de succès était en 2002.
So if you see till 2002, the results were not that great. I can say it was almost, I'll say 80% mortality in these initial procedures. So only 20% patients were surviving at that time.
Donc, je rectifie, en 2002, les résultats n'étaient pas bons. Seulement 20% des malades qui étaient transplantés survivaient.
So when the results were not good, so initially for the hospital, it was difficult to sustain the program because the mortality was so high. So what they did, they initially did few conferences where they invited the foreign speakers to see what is the problem in liver transplant program.
Alors, comme les résultats n'étaient pas bons, parce que seulement 20% survivaient, ce qu'ils ont fait est qu'ils ont appelé des gens de l'étranger, des conférenciers, pour venir voir quel était le problème avec la transplantation hépatique en Inde. Yes.
So if you see, after that, the scenario totally changed and the success rate started increasing. And if you see in 2000 till 2017, we did almost 7,400 transplants. And from 2017 to 23, we added almost 10,000 more transplants. So if you see in 2022, 23, we did almost 2,000 transplants in the country.
Alors, après cette conférence-là, le taux de succès de la transplantation hépatique a exponentiellement augmenté jusqu'à atteindre en 2023 à 2000 transplantations hépatiques. Yep.
So total number of centers, if you see situation in 2020, total number of centers in India was almost 76. Liver transplant procedure in 2019, we did almost 1,097. In 2020, because of COVID, the number decreased. But after the COVID finished, our number increased again in 2023, as I told you, that we did almost 2,000 transplants in that year. But it was still mainly in the private sector, because in public sector, if you see, they are struggling still with the other disease. And the most of these transplants are actually living donor liver transplants. And I'll say 65% of these total transplants are being done in Delhi only. If you see any early survival of the different centers, it's from 0% to 95%. The centers who are experienced now, like our center, our success rate is almost 95% now.
OK. La situation en 2020, le total des centres où on fait la transplantation hépatique est de 76 et la transplantation du foie chez vivant en 2019 était de 1907 et en 2020 était 854. Mais les transplantations se font souvent dans le secteur privé parce que dans le secteur public, ils sont encore en train d'essayer de juguler d'autres pathologies. À New Delhi, c'est seulement 65% des transplantations qui se font. Et la survie des malades, après ça, c'est entre 0 et 95%, mais dans leur centre de Manipur, ils sont autour de 95% de succès.
These are the distribution of the center. Maximum centers are actually in Maharashtra and Delhi. and third number is South Tamil Nadu only. So today, if you see, liver transplant is the pride of Indian medicine because we came from 0 to almost 2,000 transplants in a year. So coming to the end-stage liver disease, its end-stage liver disease is considered to be synonymous with chronic liver failure. And this is defined as when patient with abnormal liver function who develop decompensation or complications of cirrhosis are considered to have end-stage liver disease.
Donc, la transplantation hépatique maintenant est devenue une fierté pour les Indes. Le grand centre se trouve, le nombre de centres se trouve concentré à Delhi, autour de 12. Alors, pour l'insuffisance hépatique chronique, ce sont les malades qui développent une décompensation et des complications liées à l'insuffisance hépatique chronique. Yes?
So still, it's the 12th leading cause of death in USA. And in 2004, if you see in USA, almost 27,000 deaths happened because of this chronic liver disease. And in India, still we need 27,000 liver transplants per year for end-stage liver disease.
Donc, c'est la 12e cause de décès aux États-Unis, l'insuffisance hépatique chronique. Et en 2004, au moins 27 000 personnes aux États-Unis sont décédées. Et en Inde, ils ont besoin au moins de 27 000 cas de transplantation par an pour juguler l'insuffisance hépatique chronique.
So if you see the global cause for this chronic liver disease or cirrhosis, there is difference between the East and West countries. If you see in the Western area, but this is, I think, probably data is actually a bit old. At that time in Western countries, HCV was the most common cause. And if you see in the Eastern countries, hepatitis B was the most common cause. But nowadays it has been replaced by alcoholic liver disease, even in East and West, both places. And probably the NAFLD will be the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease will be the leading cause in next 5 to 10 years.
OK. Les causes mondiales, la distribution des causes dans le monde pour l'insuffisance hépatique chronique, il y a une différence entre l'Ouest et l'Est. À l'Ouest, c'est l'hépatite C, à l'Est, c'est l'hépatite B. L'insuffisance hépatique due à l'alcool, à l'ouest, et l'hépatite C à l'est, mais l'insuffisance hépatique due aux causes non alcooliques commence à gagner du terrain dans le monde et ça deviendra l'une des grandes causes de l'insuffisance hépatique. Yes?
So if you see, there are actually five types of actually viral hepatitis. A and E is the acute causes of this liver failure, and B, C, and D are the causes of chronic, like they are responsible for chronic liver disease mainly. So if you see the source of this virus is fecal-oral route for A and E, and it's mainly transferred through the blood and body fluids in B, C, and D.
Donc, il y a 5 sortes d'hépatites. Les A et E sont des acute ones. Les B et C sont des chronic ones. Donc, les sources d'infection, c'est les sources féco-orales pour les A et E. Et les B et C sont souvent causées par les produits dérivés du sang. Yes.
So for hepatitis B and C, good treatment is available. For hepatitis B, you can get the vaccine and you can prevent this hepatitis B. And for hepatitis C, if you see, nowadays, if you are suffering from hepatitis C, good treatment is available, good antiviral drugs are available, and cure is possible if it is treated on time. So for hepatitis, even if hepatitis B happens, then there is good antiviral drug which is available, and these both hepatitis B and C can be cured even if any patient is positive.
Pour les hépatites B et C, le traitement nous avons le traitement. Pour l'hépatite B, on a même le vaccin. Et pour l'hépatite B et C ensemble, ils peuvent être traités s'ils sont diagnostiqués à temps et le traitement peut amener à une cure de l'hépatite B et C.
So still, if you see in India, alcoholic liver disease is the leading cause for cirrhosis. It's very common in India because if you see even low socioeconomic status patients, they are actually habitual of this drinking. And even if you see high socioeconomic status, people are actually, the only difference is the quality and quantity differs. This was the famous Indian actress Meena Kumari. She also died because of alcoholic liver disease.
Donc, l'alcool est l'une des grandes causes de l'insuffisance hépatique. Même dans les milieux socio-économiques les plus pauvres, les gens s'adonnent à boire de l'alcool, même dans les milieux les plus huppés. Et c'est seulement la quantité et la qualité qui diffèrent. Il y a une actrice très célèbre en Inde qui est décédée parce qu'elle prenait l'alcool, elle a eu une insuffisance hépatique. Yes?
So if you see, it's very common nowadays. The younger generation is actually very habitual or fond of this alcoholic habit. And if you see in Indian movies, there is a lot of actually, I'll say, influence. They are influencing the youngsters for having this alcohol.
Et malheureusement, ça commence à toucher même les plus jeunes. Il y a même des cinémas qui font la promotion de l'alcool et beaucoup de jeunes s'adonnent à boire de l'alcool.
So if you see, there are different stages. If patient is taking alcohol, if someone is taking alcohol, there are different stages. Ultimately, they will become cirrhotic. But if they are in a stage of steatosis and hepatitis, this can be reversed to the normal liver. But once they reach to the stage of cirrhosis, it's irreversible.
Donc, le foie peut, quand c'est encore dans le stage où il y a beaucoup de fat, beaucoup de graisse dans le foie, ça peut se reverser sur normal, mais dès que ça atteint la cirrhose et la fibrose, ça devient irréversible, ça ne peut plus guérir. Yeah.
So again, obesity is becoming very common in even pediatric population and even in adults because of changing food habits. So this is going to be the leading cause in next 5 to 10 years for cirrhosis.
L'obésité et l'infiltration des lipides dans le foie va devenir la plus grande cause de l'insuffisance hépatique. Et comme on a le changement dans les habitudes alimentaires, ça deviendra l'une des grandes causes de l'insuffisance hépatique. Yep.
So these are the early symptoms of chronic liver disease. Patient will have jaundice. They can have anorexia. They can have easy fatigability. They can have nausea and vomiting. These are the early signs and symptoms.
Les signes avant-coureurs, c'est le malade sera ictérique, il sera fatigué et il va commencer à vomir.
And if it is not treated on time, patient can develop delayed symptoms like they can have bloody vomiting like hematemesis or melena. They can have ascites. They can have pedal edema because of low albumin. They can have hepatic encephalopathy. So these are the actually signs of decompensation, I will say, and these are usually delayed symptoms.
Les malades peuvent avoir des signes de décompensation hépatique. Ils vont commencer à vomir du sang. Ils peuvent avoir des acides. Ils peuvent avoir des édèmes. Et ils peuvent avoir des signes de l'encéphalopathie hépatique.
So once patient is actually decompensated, they can have these complications: intractable ascites, spontaneous bacterial peritonitis. They can have chronic hepatic encephalopathy. They can have recurrent GI bleed. They can have hepatorenal and hepatopulmonary syndrome.
Dès que ces complications s'établissent, les malades peuvent avoir des acides sévères avec une péritonite. Ils peuvent avoir des signes de hépatique encéphalopathie et ils peuvent saigner au niveau du système digestif. Ils peuvent avoir le syndrome hépatorénal ou des syndromes hépatopulmonaires.
So if you see prognosis in these decompensated patient is very actually poor. So once they have decompensation in form of jaundice, encephalopathy, ascites, and varicose hemorrhage, the average survival is almost 2 years. If they have hepatopulmonary syndrome, their average survival is almost 10 months. If they have SBP, their survival is 9 months. If they have hepatorenal syndrome, then their survival is almost 6 months.
Donc, en fonction des signes de décompensation, s'ils ont une décompensation une cirrhose du foie, le pronostic, le malade peut survivre pour 2 ans. S'ils ont le syndrome hépatopulmonaire, ils ne survivent que pour 10 mois. Et s'ils ont une péritonite, 9 mois. S'ils ont le syndrome hépatorénal, ils ne survivent que pendant 6 mois.
So, ideally, when liver transplant should be done, so the patient who is too well, they are not decompensated, should not be referred for liver transplant. At the same time, if patient is having complication and any decompensation, they should be referred for liver transplant. At the same time, if you see patient is too sick for liver transplant, they have a very poor outcome. So liver transplant should be done in a patient who actually had the first decompensation. They should be referred for liver transplant on time.
OK. Quand est-ce que le malade doit être transplanté? Donc, si le malade se porte bien, il ne doit pas être transplanté. Aussi, si le malade est très malade, il a beaucoup de complications, il ne doit pas être transplanté parce que le pronostic est réservé. Dès que le malade a les premiers signes de décompensation, c'est à ce moment-là qu'il faut le référer pour la transplantation parce qu'il a beaucoup de chances de survivre.
So there are actually 2 criteria for actually these patients to refer them for liver transplant. One is CTP score, child Turcotte and Pug scoring system. Second is model for end stage liver disease, which is called as MELD scoring system. If a patient is child C, along with any complication or decompensation, they should be referred for liver transplant. At the same time, if MELD score is 14 or more, they should be referred for liver transplant.
Donc, il y a des algorithmes qu'ils utilisent pour voir si le malade doit être transplanté ou pas. Il y a le Child Turcotte Pug Scoring System et il y a aussi le MELD, le modèle de transplant, le modèle de l'insuffisance hépatique. Et si le Child Turcotte Pug Scoring est de C, ou bien de MELD et de 12, là, on peut faire la transplantation rénale.
So this is the CTP scoring system. Once it is more than 10, that itself is an indication that they need liver transplant.
Et il a donné un tableau où il y a des critères pour la transplantation rénale et chacun peut lire ça. Yes?
So at the same time, if you see MELD score usually includes the 3 parameters, is bilirubin, INR, and serum creatinine. Once MELD score is more than 14, they become the candidate for liver transplant, either for even registration for deceased donor liver transplant. If they have living donor available, then they can undergo living donor liver transplant.
Donc ça, c'est le deuxième modèle, le MELD. Les paramètres en compte, c'est le sérum bilirubin, la coagulation et le taux de créatinine. Et si ça atteint 14, ils peuvent être soit inscrits sur la liste de la transplantation pour les malades qui décèdent et on prend leur organe, ou bien s'il a un match, un malade qui est un ami ou quelqu'un de la famille qui peut lui donner le rein, qui est en vie, on peut lui faire ça. Yep.
So, liver transplant is a life-saving procedure for end-stage liver disease and acute liver failure also. So, if you see the current 1-year survival is almost 85 to 90%, and 5-year survival is almost 75%. But it's increased nowadays. If you see, immediate survival is almost 93 to 95%. 1-year survival is almost 88 to 90%.
OK. La transplantation hépatique est une procédure qui sauve les vies. Le taux de survie à une année a même augmenté. Il était de 80 à 90. Il est à plus de 90 maintenant. Le taux de survie à 5 ans, il était à 75. Il est à plus de 75%, 80 à 90% maintenant.
So these are the famous actually celebrities. This is Steve Jobs. He underwent Whipple surgery for pancreatic neuroendocrine tumor. Later on, he developed neuroendocrine secondaries in the liver. So he underwent liver transplant. Same time, if you see, is a famous footballer, defender of Barcelona, Eric Abdel. He also had hepatocellular carcinoma. He underwent liver resection first. Later on, he developed recurrence. So he underwent liver transplant later on.
Il y a deux célébrités. Il y a Steve Jobs qui avait un cancer qui est allé au foie, hépatocellulaire carcinoma. Il a eu une transplantation hépatique. Il y a un défenseur de Real de Madrid qui a eu la même chose et qui a eu une transplantation hépatique aussi.
So liver transplant can be of two types. One is living donor liver transplant. Second is disease donor liver transplant. In living donor, one of the family member or relatives donate half of his liver. And in deceased donation, if some patient is brain dead, but his heart is actually working, so you can take different organs from these brain dead donors.
Les sources du foie peut être soit que la personne décède, on déclare qu'il y a mort cérébrale, on peut prendre différents organes, ou bien quelqu'un qui meurt avec un arrêt cardiaque, on peut prendre différents organes, ou bien un frère, une parenté qui est encore en vie peut donner une partie de son foie.
So this is how we do the deceased donor. We take the complete liver from the donor and we transplant it in the recipient. At the same time, if you see in living donor, we take half of the liver and we transplant it in the recipient.
Donc, on peut prendre tout le foie qui est cirrhotique, on l'enlève, on met un nouveau foie, ou bien prendre une partie du foie de quelqu'un qui est encore en vie et le transplanter sur un autre malade.
So this is the patient who is suffering from acute liver failure because her liver, if you see, her liver was normal before acute insult. She was suffering from hepatitis A and she underwent liver transplant for that.
Une patiente avec une hépatite A fulminante qui a reçu une transplantation du foie.
So because I think there is a constraint of time, because other speakers are also waiting for that, I'll just go through quickly through these slides, and I'll just these are the actually anatomical variation which we see in the donors.
OK. Ça, ce sont les images prises pour les malades qui veulent, pour les personnes qui donnent leur foie. Il y a une série d'images qu'ils font.
So we do ABO incompatible liver transplants also when blood group is not matching, because if you see initially the results of this ABO incompatible liver transplant was not good, but nowadays because of different immunosuppressive agents, development of plasmapheresis, the results of ABO incompatible liver transplant is as equal as compatible transplant.
Ils font aussi la transplantation même si les malades ont différents groupes. Dans le passé, ils ont eu des problèmes parce qu'ils n'avaient pas beaucoup d'immunosuppression, mais maintenant qu'ils ont des médicaments qui peuvent bien contrôler avec l'immunothérapie, les résultats sont les mêmes que ceux qui sont compatibles en termes de groupe sanguin.
So I'll just come to the whatever experience of our team is. We have an experience of almost over a decade. We have done more than 1,800 transplants. Our overall success rate is 95%, and in emergency cases, our success rate is 92%. Our 1 year survival is 92%, 3 year survival is almost 88%. We have done 17 combined liver kidney transplants also. We have done 5 dual lobe transplants and 4 swab transplants. These are our achievements. We have done a lot of pediatric liver transplant. We have done pediatric liver transplant in less than 10 kg weighing childs. And we have done the liver transplant in a smallest weighing child in India. We have done almost 5 dual lobe liver transplants. We have done retransplants, ABO incompatible. We have done transplant in HIV positive patients also. And we have done transplant with removal of cardiac tumor. This was first in the world of this kind of case, actually. So these are the pictures only. So to summarize, liver transplant in India, if you see, still we are dominant in living donor liver transplant. Liver transplant is a good management option for end-stage liver disease. We have a very low complication rate and good survival. Liver transplant improves the quality of life. The cost is definitely reduced nowadays from, if you compare it from the previous days. But still, if you see, there are a lot of concerns. Living donor liver transplant is still predominant, and private sector is still too dominant.
Yeah. Alors, il a donné les différentes réalisations de leur hôpital. Ils ont fait beaucoup de transplantations. Ils ont fait même la première opération au monde où ils ont aussi enlevé une tumeur cardiaque. Ils font aussi des transplantations pour les enfants en pédiatrie de moins de 10 kilos. Et ils ont le taux de succès parmi les plus élevés, plus de 95%. Avec un taux de complication qui est vraiment faible. La transplantation hépatique améliore la vie. Le prix de la transplantation a commencé à diminuer. Malheureusement, le secteur privé est le plus dominant. Le secteur public ne le fait pas beaucoup. Thank you very much, doctor.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Any question? Vous avez des questions par rapport à la présentation? I'm just asking whether there's any question from doctors. You can unmute vous pouvez mettre votre téléphone on et vous poser les questions si vous en avez.
No, we can get the question and answers in writing so that the doctor can reply tomorrow, because there is a restriction of time. Due to the paucity of time, we'll switch it to next doctor. No
problem. Thank you very much. We can now the next speaker is if I have to consult my presentation is